Hey, Michelle.
Ron, how are you?
I'm doing okay. How about yourself?
I'm doing okay. I'm just not feeling that great right now. I did something to my back and got the heating pad on, but this one hasn't been a good work day.
Understandable. Be kind to yourself. Sometimes that's all
I
we can do.
I know.
Hello,
Hello?
John. Hi, Michelle.
Hello, Patty.
Hey,
How you doing today?
How are you doing?
Doing all right.
Long time no see.
I know.
We have been anxious to meet with you.
I know. It's gonna be it's gonna be a good day. I'm excited to see how our conversation goes.
As am I. That was quite the lengthy report. It's nice to see all the pieces coming together.
It is, it's kind of just like doing a puzzle, and then you end up with a whole bunch of big pieces that kind of don't look like anything until you can get it all kind of stitched together.
So true. So true. Hey, Alex.
Hey Patty, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Can't believe it's October.
Neither can I. That the sun goes down this quickly. Yeah, I'm in complete denial.
That's the toughest part. Right on the edge of the time zone.
Oh, just wait till the clocks go back. Blech.
Hmm. But we've got Halloween coming up.
Hmm.
I do love that holiday.
What's the trick-or-treating scene like in Nahant? You get a lot of kids come by?
That many, to be honest, but the kids enjoy it. I always overbuy.
Yeah. I, I always run out. I need to overbuy. My problem is I get excited and I hand out multiple pieces of candy to the first kids that come, and then I don't have enough candy for the other kids.
You got to do it the opposite way.
Yeah.
Hey, Patty, can you clarify something for me? You had updated the capacity, the unused capacity of the school just recently, and is the upper limit that you used to distinguish that there's more capacity, is that limited by the current levels of teaching staff or by classroom space or something else?
No, not by teaching staff. We would definitely need to hire more teachers if we ever got to that capacity. It's just space.
Okay, and
sorry, friends. That was Mark, and he's up in Maine somewhere, and he's having Wi-Fi issues, and was trying to help him, but I think he'll be calling in shortly, so we'll give him a couple minutes.
Sure.
So thank you. And Patty, I heard what you said about trick or treating. You can come over on my street because I get like 100 kids every year.
Do you really? And what street would
And my
this?
husband likes Halloween. He's a Halloween guy, so we're always decorating. He's got flashing lights on the house and all crazy stuff.
What street are you on, Michelle?
Home Depot has a limit on the number of large skeletons you can buy now.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Actually, I may have taken a photo of their sign.
You see some of those houses that have like the gigantic spider on the roof.
Right,
That
right.
that gets me every time.
Or what's the house in Marblehead that always changes over every year? They do like they've gone like with King Kong, a dragon, a pirate ship, a skeleton. It's an architect, and he's part of a firm in Marblehead. And I remember reading about this a couple of years ago. They like start in the summer and try to plan what they're going to do for October, and then they like build it and stuff. It's pretty cool.
You see that okay?
Oh
Limited
yeah.
quantities are available. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Oh my God.
Limit one per
That's pretty
customer.
good.
That's crazy. Who knew? And Michelle, I'm gonna have to look that up in Marblehead. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's in Old Town. It people like park their cars and walk down to see it. It's pretty cool.
And that's actually where Hocus Pocus was filmed, not Salem.
Uh,
Wait a minute, the house that everybody visits, which is in Salem, is the wrong house?
Yeah,
yeah,
most
parts of
there
it.
they shot some scenes in Salem, but most of the movies in Marblehead.
Hmm.
Check it out. You'll notice.
Well, I've
Boy,
I've already spent more attention on that film than I ever wanted to.
It's not an option.
you have to watch Adam Sandler's Hubie
Oh,
Halloween.
I love that. That's also shot in Marblehead. I that is so funny. I grew up kind of like an Adam Sandler fan.
Yeah,
So
some of us are big Adam Sandler fans too. Yeah, and we're big fans of what was the other one? Grown Ups.
oh yeah. I
And
thought the Hubie Halloween was like one of the best ones that like kind of felt like his older movies.
yeah. Okay. I think I see Mark, so I'm gonna just ask him to unmute so he can speak. We don't lose him. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think we have quorum.
And
So
then
some
Michelle, can you
one,
make the presentation account a co-host so I can use that to screen share?
yeah, I want to go over a couple of things first and then
Of course.
chat. Okay. All right. So thanks everyone. It's 6:35 p.m. and we're going to open the meeting for the Housing Production Plan Subcommittee. Joining us is Michelle Capano, Patty Karras, Michael Raworth, Patrick O'Reilly, Lynn Spencer, and Mark Cullinan. Our guests are Alex Kopelman and John Cruz. I want to I think first I would like to just go over the feedback form and just cover off on some of the things that I had sent and make sure that we're all agreement for everybody who reviewed and read the revised housing plan. So just give me 1 second to share. Roll through these pretty quickly. And hopefully you can see my screen.
Mhm.
All right. Okay. So we gathered a bunch of updates. So things like executive summary is already in the plan, so thank you. The other one, we confirmed with Patty the needs of the Johnson School, so we're good there. We updated with adding Housing Authority South and the locations for those properties, so that's covered. We added, they're in the housing plan, there's a new section regarding the 2 new sites that we added, so Reading Cooperative Bank. And Vernon Street. We updated the church site, so we're gonna talk about that as well. Let's go through my markups. Glam is in there, so we're great there. I noticed we added more language around veterans preference and additional information around how someone qualifies for housing assistance and also some information for veterans. Patrick, I know that was one of your things as well. Hopefully you spent some time reading it and that's sufficient.
Can I pause the review and get a clarification on a couple of things? The use of the GLAM safe harbor requires more than dedicating bare land, and I wonder if the consultants have a quick way for us to understand how much affordable capital A affordable housing has to be built on any GLAM dedicated land in order to qualify, to have the land qualify for the safe harbor, towards the safe harbor.
Excuse me a minute, Mike. Sorry about the interruption. This is Dana Sheehan. Just I had to dial in remotely, so I'm
Thanks,
online
Dana.
here. I'm gonna go on mute.
Sorry?
Glad to have you. So John or Alex, did you hear Michael's question?
Yeah, so the GLAM pathway to safe harbor really just has to do with land that's used for affordable housing. I don't see anything in the state guidelines about a minimum number of units, so I would assume that just as long as the land has an affordable housing development and the property is the size that's needed. I'm trying to recall what Stantec said was the additional amount. I think it's something like 3.5 acres.
Right.
Right, but so let's assume we had a 3.5 acre parcel and dedicated that to affordable housing, uppercase A affordable housing. Somewhere I'm sure there's a requirement that that be occupied by more than one, you know, one unit somewhere.
Yeah,
So the question is, where would we look to figure out the density of that house? If you don't know the answer now, that's fine. We can get it later, but I
Right.
would like to get that clarified.
yeah, that's a good thought. I do not know the answer, so we'll look into it, and then Michelle, could maybe Stantec actually knows that as well, like from their analysis. Maybe we can
Right.
ask them.
And I apologize if I've overlooked it. Another question is
Mike, it's Mark. Before we change the subject a little, I believe there's a difference on the GLAM between whether or not the development is rental or owner.
that may be, but we should know the consequences of both, right? Yeah, I agree.
My
Well,
understanding,
that's
I'm sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Go
only
ahead.
if there's a comprehensive. Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I think that we discussed that earlier in the summer, I believe, and the difference there, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the rental units under a comprehensive permit, that the totality of the land there could be used for the GLAM analysis, but you know, uh, you know, if the comprehensive permit involved owner, you know, selling the properties, then that would not qualify. It would just be the individual units.
yeah, I think you're right, Patrick. So let me give you an example. Let's say we had 1 acre, 1 acre piece of property, and we developed a comprehensive development of say 10 units. If we had 25% set aside for affordable, then and if it was ownership, it was condos, then only 25% of that acre would be contributed to the GLAM analysis. However, if we set aside 25%, but all of the units were rental, then the whole acre would be eligible for GLAM.
Yeah, the
That's a
only
good,
caveat I would put on that is that it's only for the duration of that deed restriction. So usually there's a limitation of 20 or 25 years on the deed restriction. So we'd have to somehow come up with more land later once those deed restrictions expire.
That may be true, Patrick.
well, affordable housing that's built today, it is really best practice to ask for the deed restriction to be in perpetuity, so it does not expire.
That's
Even-
is that a
E-
change?
even if it's rental.
Yeah, no matter what, we you can request, you know, especially if it's a LIP 40B,
Right.
you can request that the deed restricted units be affordable in perpetuity. So that they never expire, you know, there's
That's
affordable units and they don't subtract
We-
from your SHI.
You could make that a condition of approving the development, right?
Yeah.
Right. Which is more stronger than a request.
Yeah, so you
Great.
can make sure that happens. Yep.
And also the other option or the
Okay.
partial option that we may be making progress on by moving toward this plan gets us the ability to stave off hostile 40Bs as long as we are adding, what is it, 0.5% to 1% to our existing deed restricted housing stock per year. But the question is, does that increment have to apply in each year in order to maintain the safe harbor? Or if in the first year we get 3%, does that carry over to future years? See what I mean?
That pathway to safe harbor is temporary. So,
No, I understand it's temporary
yeah.
in the long term. In other words, you can't extend it forever because it assumes you're increasing the housing base. But my point is that housing stock increases don't always come in a linear fashion. They may be a burst this year and then a burst 3 years from now, something like that. So the question is, what happens in the intervening years when there's no additions to the housing stock taking place? See what I mean?
Yeah, well, if you add 1% to the SHI, which is equivalent of 15 affordable units, you get a 2-year period of safe harbor. When that 2 years is up, then you would need to see another increase. So that, yeah, like we're talking about, that's temporary. Glam, if you meet that, that's permanent, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Correct. Okay.
Okay, so I'm
Great.
gonna,
Thank you.
yep, I just want to finish a couple more things, and then I want to dive into the gender, and then I will try and give you the presentation, and then we can kind of just go through all the things that we want to cover today regarding the sites and the housing strategies. So the other thing is we added an appendix around references for the criteria of housing choice. I saw that in there when I reviewed it, so that's great. We addressed the constraints around Nahant students and also whether Swampscott has constraints, so that was covered. Dana, thank you. You sent you some information around making sure we covered veterans preference. Hopefully you also reviewed that, and those updates are satisfactory. So what I marked in gray is the things that we covered. The other things we'll weave into tonight's discussion. So I'm just gonna pop over to the agenda. All right, couple of things. I apologize. The September 28th meeting minutes, I don't know what happened. I worked on them Sunday night and they were in great order. And when I put everything together to email out to the committee, for some reason, something happened to the file. So you don't have all the nice things I had written for our meeting minutes. So we won't be approving them tonight. What the chair is asking for is approval for the meeting minutes for August 31st, 2023. Dana, you won't be able to vote because you weren't a member of the committee. We should have quorum for that. And also if there are any changes or updates that we need to make to them.
Okay, so move, Michelle.
Thank you, Mark. So Mark, so moved. Do we have a second? Second from Michael. Any discussion on the meeting minutes? If none, I'm just going to go right to a roll call vote. I'm going to start with Mark.
Yes.
Lynn.
Yes.
Thank you. Michael.
Yes.
Patty.
Yes.
Patrick.
Yes.
And the chair is aye. Thank you. Okay, great. So next we're going to move right into reviewing the housing plan updates. So John, I'm going to pass it over to you and make you host or co-host. I'm sorry, where is your presentation? Oh, here it is. I'm sorry. Make host. Here we go. All right. Yes. Think you have it now.
I think so as well. I see the little green screen share button popping up, so I'm just going to go ahead and get right into this.
Okay, great.
Okay, beautiful. Just had to get that big ridiculous Zoom control bar on the top out of the way. Now I'm all set.
Okay, great.
Alrighty, so tonight we have a few things that we really need to get done. We're going to talk through the finalized HPP development opportunity sites. the finalized HPP strategy implementation matrix, and steps to plan adoption. And our goal, to be respectful of everybody's time, hopefully, is to have a hard stop tonight at 8 o'clock. So I think we're going to get there. It's not that much stuff. And you guys have been putting in a tremendous amount of really good work that's been really helpful in getting us to where we need to be. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alex.
Yeah, so if you just want to flip forward, this is basically just a review of what you've seen already in terms of the plan and the HPP sites. We just wanted to make sure everything looks good here. We added the additional sites that you discussed last week, with the exception of the business district on Nahant Road. Not because we don't support looking at that area for housing opportunities, but just because it is an area rather than a specific parcel that would be identified as an HPP opportunity site, where you would be looking at some kind of specific development opportunity. However, it is certainly an area that is one that will be explored for potential 3A zoning, since there is some existing non-conforming multifamily and mixed use in the area, and we've had several conversations about that throughout the process and gathered public input on that. So it's just best treated as an area for a potential 3A zoning district. Doesn't necessarily mean that will happen, but one that we will explore.
Let me just clarify something on this bullet number 2. It says all sites must be parcels, comma. The way I'm reading this, that should probably be a semicolon, starting off again saying general areas and collection of parcels are not sites, but can be identified, et cetera, et cetera. Is that the meaning? Am I getting the meaning correct?
The meeting is correct, Mike. Absolutely.
Okay, then I would, to the extent that it matters, I would suggest that be modified by a semicolon so that people can understand it in the future.
Thank you. We'll do so.
So does that make sense to everyone, that the business district area on Nahant Road would be looked at as a potential 3A zoning area, since it's a collection of sites rather than a specific site?
I'm comfortable with it, but I mean, we had some discussion at last week's meeting on this particular site. We did list it on the agenda as a vote to include it in the plan, but now it looks like if there is consensus not to include it, then we can do that, but we'll likely have to vote on it, since we had so much dialogue last week about it, and then we added it as a voting item on the agenda.
Well, my understanding of last week is that we were talking exclusively about 40B parcels, and
Yes.
perhaps we were incorrect in treating that cluster of areas as an appropriate parcel. And we could certainly include it separately for 3A, but I didn't understand us to be talking about 3A at all last week.
No, we didn't talk about 3A at all. We were exclusively talking about 40B, but because the discussion came up, and we tabled a vote for it, and I have it on the agenda. I mean, we can remove it from the agenda, and that's fine. I would like to make sure that we probably have an official vote that will not include it in the housing plan, and it will be considered under 3A zoning, if that makes sense to everyone.
Well, I mean, but what we seemed to have agreed upon last week was that areas to be considered under the 40B consideration. Now, maybe we painted with too broad a brush, but that would simply mean we need to go and identify specific parcels rather than the generalized area, rather than simply sweep away what we seemed to agree upon last week.
Yeah.
Let me, Alex, I thought
Yeah.
in our meeting last week with Michelle and Tony and you and myself that we were going to include this under 40B, but as an appendix, because it was not part of the original sites that we had designated. I thought we were going to designate.
Yeah, that's what we discussed, and we did do that in the plan for the specific sites. But since this is not a actual site, it is an area. It just doesn't quite make sense for an HPP site or for 40B. Just, being at the end of the process like this, I don't think it'll be possible to zero in on a specific site. I could tell you just kind of on a higher level that 40B is good for facilitating development on a actual specific property. Oftentimes it is like a medium to higher density development, and in that area you have small multifamily buildings and small mixed use, and I think that 3A zoning would be a much more appropriate way to facilitate some new development that's consistent with that area than a 40B, which would be, typically used on a larger site and be a somewhat larger development. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
So, yeah, like you, Mike, I'm a little confused. So are we saying that the bank site is not an individual? So what, are you
No,
saying?
they're talking about the business district.
Yeah, you're talking about a business district. So it includes the bank, what is
No.
now the surf shop, the tides, and that whole area.
No, they're talking about the short beach business district.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna go.
The area where Seaside Pizza is in Turnstone
Yeah,
Market.
yeah.
Oh, okay, okay.
So that being an actual district in an area would make
I
a lot
got
of sense to look at for 3A zoning, but since we're not
Right.
talking about a specific site, it wouldn't be an HPP site that we would be looking at for 40B.
Okay.
The
I'm sorry.
bank is a specific parcel, and we did include that in a new section of the plan.
Okay, my fault. Thank you.
I think we're getting hung up on definitions though. We didn't know about the distinction between an area and a site last week. We could have, pulled out a map and specified a bunch of individual sites, and maybe we should have, but we didn't know we needed to. I think
we did, actually.
What?
I think we did in the motion. My recollection is that we specified the parcels along Nahant Road in the business district.
That's right,
Oh,
we
well,
did.
maybe we did. So that would, that we used a general description rather than a specific itemization. But that should obviate the concern that's been flagged here in bullet point 2, right? We designated those particular parcels.
Well, we have not, we don't have notes that identify specific parcels. The notes we have just say Nahant Business District.
Correct.
along
We
Nahant
did not
Road.
identify any particular parcel on Nahant Road in the business district. We just
we
said
can- we-
business district.
We can do that.
I beg to differ. I think we did specify the parcels along Nahant Road in the business district. So
Okay, but we
Which
can.
parcels, Patrick? We didn't specify any addresses.
But
We only
whatever
said the business district, which runs from Antigua Way, at that corner where Nahant Associates is, all the way to Seaside Market.
Okay, but whatever we did, we can now fix. We can go back and specify individual parcels so that the concern that the consultants have identified in bullet point here 2 no longer pertains. And their point about its value as a 3A spot is still good, but I look at it that, for example, let's say that there was an opportunity to take the present, the Captain Seaside location by eminent domain and put up an apartment building there, which would be pertinent for, could be restricted so that it satisfied our progress toward 40B. The fact that there's a lot of other structures nearby might influence how one does that, but that isn't to say that it would be impossible to use that property that way, because many of the other properties we've identified would be subject to eminent domain if you couldn't make a deal with the existing owner, correct?
So the one thing I'd like to say, and this is more of a caution to the wind, is that we are coming up against timelines in which we need to get the final draft plan to the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board, and then to have this meeting in the beginning of November. And so if we are adding scope to this, right, we have to get or require time for work to be done to carve out the opportunities and the constraints, and then come back and review them. I just don't think it's plausible to be doing this right now, given that we already have talked about this at different times. We've had, we presented it to the public in different forums. What I'm proposing is that we should move forward with what we have. The plan can be modified after we submit it and it's approved with the state. We can always come back and say, let's reconsider the business district. But we are going to be talking about it for 3A, so it is going to come up again. I just want to be sensitive to what we've already have designed right now in the housing plan. Obviously, it's not perfect. It's not going to make everybody happy. We know that, but we have to start somewhere, and then we can keep modifying it and improving it as we go along, and we can work with the town administrator and the Board of Selectmen on that.
Yeah, I think on this particular one, I have no objection to that approach. Maybe on others, I would still reserve an objection, but I think ultimately what we're saying with this opportunity site is saying we're inviting, developers to propose a comprehensive permit, 40B developments. So that's said, I think if we cover this in the 3A zoning, that would really cover that need, in that people wouldn't need a comprehensive permit. They would just do it by right. And we can, and my understanding is we can include a affordable housing component as a requirement of a by right development. So I think that this one that makes sense. I think I'm not sure not including it in 40B, maybe just for expediency's sake, we would just move on for this one. But I think we did identify the parcels. We have talked about this in public meetings. It just kind of kept slipping off the for whatever reasons. But I'm willing to move forward on this one anyway.
Michelle, once this report is done later this year, does this committee disband?
No, I don't know what the plan is going to be yet. I will be talking with the town administrator on that.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to move on. I think what I'm hearing is
I'm on, Michelle.
I hear you, Tony. Thank you.
This is Tony.
We are not, and if it's, I'll leave it to the committee unless if you want to vote on it, but we are not going to include the business district in the housing plan as an opportunity site
Under 40B.
under 40B.
Okay.
Okay. Great. So I think we can move on. Alex, I'll give it back to you.
Thanks, John. Can we flip forward? So that's just the map of the final sites that we have. The other point of discussion, I believe, was about the church site, and in the revised report, we made it very clear that we're not talking about the parcel that has the actual church on it, but the one to the northwest that has the rectory and parking lot, because the archdiocese had discussed some interest in possibly building affordable housing there. So we made that really clear. And this is something that's a potential opportunity that the archdiocese and the church would have to explore. We also incorporated the feedback about there may need to be some kind of legal agreement between the archdiocese to use it for a different purpose. So we've noted that as well, but I believe that's the only other update. We also did add the Housing Authority South based on your vote at the last committee meeting. So I believe all of the changes to sites have been addressed, but just want to check and make sure everyone's happy with the revisions.
Can I recommend that the site that you've now more clearly identified be referred to as the rectory site, so as to remove the possibility of confusion, so that people don't understand it as threatening the structure of the church itself?
Yeah, I
I
think
think
that's a good idea.
It's a great
Alex,
idea,
it's,
Mike.
yeah, so after the title where it says church site, I would just put hyphen and just say the rectory.
Yeah, we'll do that. And the final version of this map won't have the church parcel outline. It'll just have the rectory parcel.
Okay, great. Now, in our agenda, ladies and gentlemen,
And
we
is that-
had, go ahead, Tony.
I was just gonna ask if that was accurate, the part about the archdiocese expressing interest in developing that, or is it more so us identifying it as a potential parcel?
Tony, let me jump in. A number of years ago, I think probably back in 2012, 2013, I had discussions with the archdiocese about this. They told me at that time that they were not ready to commit to, the church, but they would let the town know if they were going to sell the property. They would give the town first right of refusal, and they indicated the rectory site. So that's as far as I know.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure that we're not, speaking for the archdiocese inappropriately in any way. I'm not, I don't know how it's exactly written in the plan, but you might want to just go through that a little bit with a fine tooth comb and make sure that we're not, speaking out of turn. But it does sound like it's an opportunity and that they're open to, communicating with the town about it.
Okay, so Alex, John, I can work with you on that, the description.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Well,
Lynn, go ahead.
Lynn, yeah.
Did I just get recognized?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Along those same lines, I'd like to suggest that we do further definition on the country club site. Same kind of situation, we've got an ownership interest there. They have not been approached. I think it's a bold and somewhat too bold of a gesture to show the entire front lawn of that property. I do think that there's value in looking at the building site and the adjoining lawns and parking lot next to it, but I do not feel that it is prudent or appropriate or historically appropriate to take the entire front of that property for affordable housing. And I'm an advocate for affordable housing. I'm also an advocate for the historic preservation interests in this town. We had a study several years ago that identified a number of heritage landscapes, and this was certainly one of them. Thank you.
Yeah, so to your point, I think we can just make a note about how the entire property wouldn't necessarily be developed, but I want to make it really clear that by identifying an HPP opportunity site, we are not saying to acquire the site. We are saying that this private property owner may completely on their decision at some point may choose to want to build some housing there, and it could be a mixture too of affordable housing and market rate housing. It's really up to the developer. We're simply saying that based on our analysis that looks at things like walkability, access to transit, things about a livable area of town, a good place for housing, this makes sense. We've gathered public input and the public is generally supportive. But ultimately this decision is up to the private property owner. And so what they would develop there would be up to them, and any kind of regulations that you would potentially put there if you adopted a zoning district there, or if you invited them to submit a 40B application, you know, then there would be some back and forth in terms of what would happen there. But it's really a lot of that has to do with what the property owner decides.
I certainly appreciate what you're saying, but I also know that people sort of read a map.
Yeah.
And the kind of nuances that you've just provided, I don't think necessarily get absorbed. They read a map. So I am not interested in having red flags that actually stonewall these recommendations. I'm trying to add some refinement, just as I've previously suggested that design guidelines will be an appropriate next step for the succeeding committee or involvement of this committee as they move forward. But I do think that showing that entire parcel is problematic.
So Lynn, it's Michelle. Do you want us to redraw
That's what
the
yeah.
map? So it excludes the green to the left. So it would
That's right.
be Tudor Estate, the parking area, the tennis court, and the elevated court, and everything to the left would be excluded. So officially, I think we always talked about it because we recognize it's like the unofficial town green. That
Yeah,
would still be-
exactly.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Alex, John, are you understanding that? If you want, I can possibly send something over.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind just marking up a photo for us,
I
and we
can
can
do that.
follow your lead on that.
Okay, got that.
Thank you, Lynn.
Sure, thanks.
So let me just go back. As I was saying earlier, in the agenda, we had listed to vote to include the revised church property in the housing plan. Do we still want to move forward with that vote? Or
You
are we
mean to change it
comfortable
to
with
the
tonight's?
rectory?
Yeah, just change it to the rectory.
It is the rectory, but coming out of last week.
Label it as the rectory is my point.
That's not what I'm saying, Michael. When we had last week's discussion, it was the entire property. We revised that now to show the L shape, which is the carve out. A couple of members on the committee asked, could we, reconsider this and vote on it at next week's meeting? So my ask is, do you still want to vote on it? Or is everyone comfortable with the revisions that we currently have and we can move forward? And then Dana, yes, I see your hand up, so thank you.
Thanks, Michelle, for recognizing me. I just to comment about the church site and red flags. Even the rectory portion of the church site doesn't seem to offer a lot of development opportunity based on the way it's shaped. Or misshapen, I guess, and there's not a lot of space there. And the whole idea of, like Luna was mentioning, red flags. The church itself, I think, is red flags. There's a lot of development opportunities in town, and I'm going to advocate for just taking the whole thing off. I know some of the committee, and I respect their opinion, want to move forward with the rectory. I'm against that too. I just don't think it adds anything to the housing production plan in terms of community support. So I'm in favor of voting for it. It was put on the table. It was put on the table from taking it off altogether, but I'm still in favor of just taking it off altogether. Thank you.
So is there a motion? Does someone want to make a motion to make a decision on what we do with the revision to the church site?
I'm happy making a motion to delete the church site altogether from the housing production plan at this point.
Okay. Is there a second to Dana's motion?
Seconded.
Patrick is second. Any further discussion on the motion? There's no further discussion, then we'll go to a roll call vote. So Michael?
No.
Dana?
Yes, to delete the church and the rectory.
Okay. Patty? You're mute.
Sorry. No. to the rectory.
Okay.
Yes, to the church.
Mark,
No.
Patrick,
Yes.
Lynn,
No,
and the chair is no. So the motion's failed. Okay, so now we are gonna move on. Alex,
Okay, so just to be clear, then we are keeping the rectory, identifying
Yes.
it as the rectory to make that
Mm.
very clear, and we're taking off the other parcel that has the church.
I think it
Correct.
requires another vote. No, a motion and a vote.
Okay, I move that we modify what's currently marked as Church St. Thomas Aquinas to delete the southeast portion that includes the structure of the church and the parking lot, to have it to have the only thing that remain on the list be the north and western portions in L shape that include the rectory and parking area.
is there a second to Michael's motion?
Sorry.
Seconded.
Mark has seconded. Okay. Further discussion on the motion?
Is that a motion or a novel?
Would you like to rephrase it yourself, Patrick? You're welcome to.
Well, I don't want it included, but I would think you could just identify the rectory parcel as including it. So, but anyway,
Yes.
I think we can interpret it as thus.
My motion
Okay.
stands.
Okay, if there's not further discussion on the motion, then we'll go to a roll call vote. Michael,
Aye.
Dana,
No.
Patrick,
No.
Patty,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Lynn,
yes.
and the chair is yes, the motion passes. Okay, Alex, back to you.
All right, thank you. So I think we're all set on sites. So now we want to just go through, we talked about this already. We have added those other sites on their own section of the plan. So I don't think there's much more to discuss there. I have about 45 minutes
No,
left.
actually, so I think we did have a positive consensus adding the bank site, but we still wanted to discuss Vernon Street and vacant land like Vernon Street. There is on the agenda vote whether we include it or not. I know there was very productive discussion last week on this. However, I feel there are other sites like Vernon Street, similar composition, that could be included, and to carve out one private owned site without considering others, I think it frankly feels disingenuous. So I did some research. There's another site on Vernon Street. There are 2 sites on Swallow Cave Road, 1 site on Prospect Street, all anywhere from 20,000 square feet to 35,000 square feet. They could all be listed, frankly. But again, they're all privately owned. And I feel like taking privately owned, given that we haven't even presented this to the public for their view and consideration, I feel like it's not fair to do that. And I think it warrants more discussion. And again, obviously, any one of these would require some type of eminent domain taken or a discussion with the property owner to see if they were interested in developing those sites. The other thing I wanted to point out in terms of the research that I did is that I found 3 other locations that only have either like a garage on it, but they're large properties, and there also could be considered development opportunities as well. So my point is, I would prefer not to include this. I don't think it's going to really add any further value to what we currently have in the plan. Later on, once the plan is presented and accepted by the state, if we find that as we're moving towards, we need more opportunities for site selection, or we're hearing more feedback from the public to say, can we include other sites and not make a decision, then we should reopen the plan. But I think for right now, I think the Vernon Street site should come off.
How is that different from the Reading Cooperative Bank, which is also privately owned and has not been part of the discussion up until now?
Same thing we can say about the Knights of Columbus and Bayside. We can take those off too. Those are privately owned.
Yeah, but they were included in the discussion, in the
They
earlier
were,
discussions and
yeah, they were previously identified and presented to the public. Neither one
Right.
of these sites were previously identified or presented to the public. We
right.
could take
But
those off.
your suggestion is that we take off Vernon Street because you identified other properties, but you seem to be content with Reading Cooperative Bank.
That's business. And I think that in the spirit of other business-like locations like Knights of Columbus and Bayside, it fits the same composition. Vernon Street is an open vacant land. And so I just felt like as I'm thinking about this and looking at the plan, does it make sense to carve this out separately? It's owned by a single person. It's not in a trust or named LLC. I just feel like if you're going to do that, then we should be considering other vacant lands as well. And, you know, certainly I'd love to hear from other people's views, but I think we just have to be thoughtful in what we've currently have identified in the plan. Just again, we can always come back and revise the plan afterwards. Remember, this is only a 5-year plan, so it can get updated. And these other sites can be, you know, shortlisted later and added. So I don't see the significance of adding it for the first time.
Well, we discussed the Valley Road School last week because Josie was concerned about the, if you will, the balance of sites being somehow imbalanced and leaving certain areas of town protected. So we've cast our net wider so that that was no longer the case. And that caused us to consider the bank site and the one Vernon Street vacant lot that somebody could think of off the top of their head. Now, if there's additional sites that are vacant, even though they're privately owned, then I think we should consider those. You know, the fact that they're privately owned doesn't distinguish them from the country club, which is also privately owned, even though it's owned by a group. And, you know, there's other sites that would require either purchase negotiations with a private owner or eminent domain. And the fact that you have to go through different pathways to get access to a particular site doesn't really matter. They're each individual according to what they are. And I think these sites were included so that we would no longer be subject to the accusation that we're somehow protecting the rich side of town.
Well, there's no sites that we selected along Willow Road, and there's, you know, beautiful homes and properties along there. You know, the same
There's
thing.
there's no vacant land along Willow Road.
Well, there's vacant land on Carey Street, and we didn't select Carey Street, and there's a site with 80,000 square feet on it. So I guess, you know, and again, that's on the side of Nahant that, you know, is, you know, from a tax base is significant for us. And there's a lot over on Spouting Horn Road as well. We could add those sites.
Yeah, you know, Michelle, I do think there is a distinction between the sites that we have identified and other vacant sites that are privately owned. I think by and large, the sites that we identified were sites either business districts, LLCs, those types of things. We haven't identified a privately owned site that I know of. And none of those have come up in our public forum. So
Right.
I do agree with you that it would be dangerous for us to all of a sudden throw them on now at the last minute. You know, as I said before, I mean, I would not like to wake up tomorrow morning and read the Lynn item and say, oh, my property has been identified as a development opportunity.
Yeah.
You know, that none of this has been discussed in public forum. And as Michelle said, this can be revised every 5 years. And if some of those sites come up and we think that they're eligible, then we can identify them at that point. In addition to that, I think some of the sites up in the East Point, not that I'm trying to be protective of that in any way. But they're in trusts. Those trusts may have limitations to them in terms of conservation restrictions, and none of that has been investigated. So to slap something on them at this point is dangerous, I think.
Yeah, I would just say from a technical standpoint, you know, I recommend not adding sites at this point. You know, this the sites that are identified were based on months of work analyzing constraints like floodplain areas, sea level rise, wetlands, topography, all of that. And then they were presented to the public for input, and we got public input on them. So it's not like we just decided to pick sites. This analysis started by looking at the entire town. It focused on areas that had less development constraints and more in places of town that have access to resources like public transit and walkability and things of that nature. And then public input was collected on them. So I really think that maybe these are ones that you keep in your mind for when 5 years comes up. It's time to update the plan again, and can look at them as potential opportunities and get public input at that time. That's my
By the time we have to
recommendation.
revise another plan, we're likely probably going to go through the same process in terms of like funding and assistance. And hopefully most of us will be here for, you know, I'll say 2.0 of the housing plan. And we can, again, present all of these open sites to the public. Again, I feel like this vacant, the one on Vernon Street, is in an individual's name. And again, has not been presented to the public. And I think the public has a right to weigh in on it. I certainly welcome further feedback on it.
So Michelle, could I be recognized? So
Yes.
it's Lynn speaking. I evidently missed a very colorful meeting last week while I was on vacation, and I'm sorry that I missed that opportunity, but I believe that the points that have been raised about the fact that these properties have not been in public forum, that they are privately owned, really should argue that these be, you know, put in the back corner for now. I think there's, you know, Mike has always got good reasoning, and I so respect what he has to say. But I do think that this is adding something in at the last minute that seems, in fact, quite a token gesture.
All right. Thank
And
you, Lynn.
that's,
So
yeah, I just want to add, if I could.
go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, no, and I think that's right, and I think I did mention that last week that I had heard certainly criticism. I'm not sure if it was I believe it was at the public forum, but that we had not thoroughly reviewed other areas of town, and I think that's a reflection of the limited time we had, you know, in certain preliminary meetings that, you know, we just exhaustively talked about as many sites as we could, and we you know, that's a limitation. It's always a limitation of the process that we can only review so many sites. So I think it's a fair point that we have not, these were late considerations, and we should you know, treat them as such. And but I think it's worth reflecting on the process that we, you know, got criticism and just didn't, you know, weren't as thorough as we should have been looking at additional sites.
So I could just respond to some of the input we got at the forum, because we did get some input about, you know, have you looked at these larger privately owned sites? And many of them are in areas that are affected by flooding, wetlands, and other development constraints. So that's one of the big reasons why a lot of them were eventually vetted and removed from consideration. And many of the sites in East Point are owned by trusts and have limited protection through conservation. And some of them are permanently protected and have deed restrictions that prevent development there. So that's why a lot of those removed from consideration. For any remaining sites, I think the plan provides opportunities to expand housing stock by giving private property owners the option of maybe doing an accessory dwelling unit, which is one of the zoning recommendations. So that is another way that these larger privately owned properties are considered and addressed in the plan. And then we also have the 3A effort, which will also look at zoning and changing what private properties are allowed to do in the areas that we identify for 3A zoning. So those properties are addressed that way. And then finally, these actual HPP sites really did focus, although there are a few that are privately owned, but they're in there for specific reasons. Like for instance, the Archdiocese, we heard from the town, had reached out at some point about some interest there. So there's specific reasons for those properties, but mostly they concentrated on publicly owned land because that's what the town has the greatest leverage in deciding what happens there. And then my final point I'll make is that there are 10 HPP sites identified in this plan. So there are plenty of opportunities identified. I don't really think you need more at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, the chair motions that we remove Reading Cooperative Bank and Vernon Street vacant lot as additional opportunities from the housing protection plan. Is there a second on the motion?
I second that.
Lynn seconds. Any further discussion? There's no further discussion. We'll go to a roll call vote. Lynn,
Yes.
Patrick,
Yes.
Patty,
Yes.
Michael,
No.
Mark,
Yes.
Dana.
This is a tough one. I'm gonna go no.
Okay, the chair is yes. The motion passes. Thank you, everyone. Okay, back to you, Alex.
All right, so we've got a half an hour left in the meeting, and what we would like to do is discuss implementation, generally speaking, for the strategies that the committee has reached consensus to include in the final plan. They've been fully written up. I think everything is good, but what we would like to be able to include at the very end of the plan is a implementation chart that provides some higher level guidance on how to implement the recommendations. A lot of, implementation considerations are written into the recommendations, but what we want to discuss with you and really lean into your local expertise and knowledge here is generally what time frame do we believe each recommendation would be implemented in, thinking in the short term, midterm, and long term, and then what entities in town would need to be involved and consulted and worked with when you're considering implementing these strategies. So if you flip forward, John, just a reminder that these are our goals. You're very familiar with them at this point, obviously. So flip forward again, please, John. Just a quick reminder about the ways that we looked at weighing the different strategies in terms of impact towards advancing those goals, scored 1 to 3. Implementation factors like public support, feasibility, and cost implications scored -3 to +3, and then the totals there. That's how we got from 12 strategies to 6. So then flip forward, John. At this point now, what we want to be able to do is provide some high-level guidance about which strategies you would be looking at implementing in the short term, midterm, and long term. Which entity in the town would lead, describing the actual details and all the specifics of implementing the strategy, and then what other entities in town would also need to be involved in more of a supporting role. So for example, and this isn't necessarily how it needs to be, but just to give you an idea of of what we're looking for here is, you know, you have that, the first strategy, establish affordable housing trust. So this is something that would, you know, as in this example, we're saying would be led by the town staff, but then there would be support from, we think establishing a committee to actually lead the implementation would be good. So supporting from an implementation committee, you would want to have the select board involved, the planning board involved, and the CPC involved. And then this would be maybe something that you would be focusing on in the midterm, or ongoing. So that's just how we wrote it up in the example, but we want to ask you about what you think in terms of that strategy and the others, so that when this plan is approved, we have an idea of, okay, well now, like, let's look at establishing affordable housing trust. There are details and things that still need to be decided. It still needs to be voted on at town meetings. So there's additional actions and steps needed to implement this. So what we want to look at right now is what entity would be leading that implementation effort in those discussions about implementing that recommendation, and which entities would need to be involved in a supporting role.
Hey, Alex, it's Michelle. So I have a couple of questions. So in terms of the time frame, what is your guidance in terms of what is short-term, medium-term, and long-term?
Well, it's a 5-year plan, so you're trying to accomplish these things in 5 years. So short
Okay.
term would be like, you know, we're gonna start on that one right away, or maybe it's just an easy thing to do, low hanging fruit. So like, I think strategy 6 in terms of promoting those programs, getting them up on the town's website, that's something that would, you know, be a light lift, something that you could do in the short term. You know, something that you could do with some of the administrative staff that you have. You know, wouldn't be difficult. So that would be like maybe like in the next year. The midterm would be like between now and maybe like 2 to 3 years. And then the long term is something that, you know, this is going to take a lot of work. There's still a lot of discussions to be had. There's a lot of things that need to be done, like a town meeting vote, something like that. So this is probably going to take us the full length of the plan, 5 years. So 1 to 2 years, 3 years, 5 years.
Okay, so on the first one, establish an affordable housing trust. I know you put the lead as the town staff.
Those are really just
I guess-
placeholders, Michelle, to give you an
Yeah,
idea.
no,
as far
I
as
know
where
that.
things
I
are
know that.
going.
I'm just
Okay.
wondering, you know, coming out of having this housing committee, if there's a maybe it is the housing committee, and maybe it's something else that actually their role focuses on executing the plan. I know you have you say implementation committee from support side, but I almost feel like there needs to be an ongoing housing committee that takes the plan and actually becomes the stewards to make sure the strategies get implemented.
Yeah, I agree.
Right, okay. So I think this is great. I guess the other question is this going to be an appendix in the housing plan, or is this just going to be a work product that we would, you know, share with, you know, Tony and his staff and whoever becomes the implementation committee, or, you know, the next, you know, the next generation of the housing committee?
Yeah, the idea is just to take this chart and put it at the very end of the recommendation chapter. So after you read
Okay.
through all the recommendations, you have this chart so that it is a tool for you to go then later. And, you know, if you continue this committee, or you create another committee that's focused on implementation, then, you know, you have some guidance of like, okay, for example, doing an ADU bylaw, you know, who would be involved in that? Probably the planning board, zoning board of appeals, you know, and then you could go to those boards and say, you know, you're the lead entity for this recommendation, so we want to have some conversations with you, or have some of your board members on this committee of implementing that sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess we want to talk about the second one.
Well, for the first one, I mean,
Alright.
that's just a placeholder. Who do you think would be leading that the implementation of that recommendation would be? More specifically, Tony, the town administrator?
I would say town staff slash HPP committee.
Okay. And then do we have everyone that would be supporting? We have the select board, planning board, community preservation committee.
The housing authority is missing.
Yep.
Yes,
Need
right.
the housing authority.
I almost feel like the housing authority might be part of the lead.
That could
Could be
happen
very
also.
well too.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. And then, so I think we should have town staff and housing authority as the lead. For support, I think, the select board and the CPC for sure. Planning board, I don't think so as much because they're more about permitting development and this is as a fund. But I don't know if people feel like they should be involved, we can include them too.
How about HPP for support?
The HPP committee,
Yes.
yep. So then the support would be HPP committee, select board, and the CPC.
That works.
And I would think that timing wise, this requires a town meeting vote, you know, so you would need to have some more community conversations about this, make sure it's really clear, spend some time building support and getting organized before a town meeting. So I would think this is either going to be midterm or long term. Although I do think that you need to have this trust to work on a lot of other initiatives. So I would recommend a midterm, but what's everyone's thoughts on time frame?
Well, it's.
So
So I would
seem-
like to see it short term because I want to
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
it started and start to get the funding in there. We won't be able to execute, like use the funding, but at least get the funding mechanisms going. So it aligns with the other longer term plans that will come later.
So a
would
question for,
agree.
a question
ahead,
for
Mike.
Lynn, once this trust is established, it can begin to receive annual funds from the Community Preservation Act, is that right?
It can, yes,
So the sooner the better, right?
I would think so.
I would agree with Michelle short term.
All right, it sounds like we're in agreement for short term.
Well, I mean, it needs to be defined, really. The Affordable Housing Trust, there are a lot of different versions out there. So I think there's some work to do and how it's going to line up in terms of governance and funding. In the meanwhile, CPC can keep a separate sub-account for affordable housing until it's ready.
We already have that right now, Dana.
We already
for
have it.
CPC, but this becomes a different level of responsibility and support that the town needs. I agree that obviously there's some education and knowledge that needs to happen for the community to understand how this works. But there's plenty of examples currently in other communities that do have an affordable housing trust that oversees their funds and are using it for affordable housing projects. We can tap into those examples and use those to help shape what we want to see here.
Can't see any reason why it shouldn't be ready for action at next town meeting.
That's why I think it should be short term.
Right.
Well, it sounds aggressive to me. There's a lot of definition that needs to go into this, but
I think given
get-
the activities, and
6
given the
months.
need, yeah, I think it can be done. I think given the need, we've heard from the governor, we have a housing crisis, not just an affordable housing crisis, and generally a housing crisis. I think communities need to be aggressive on accomplishing these goals and not let them linger.
I do think too that, you know, you have some momentum from the housing plan where you've been doing a lot of community engagement and building awareness of housing needs, and you have all of the data from the comprehensive housing needs assessment. So it is timely to be making the case for this.
I agree. And we did get a support from our public forums on this. So I think short term is an appropriate designation for this.
All right. And of course, this can always change, you know, this is just general guidance, but it's good to this is more of like an activity of thinking about, all right, how are we gonna move forward and take the next steps. So it looks like we're all set on the Affordable Housing Trust. Just we've got 15 minutes left, so I'm gonna move on. The second one is to adopt a zoning law permitting accessory dwelling units.
It's obviously the planning board, but it's not a simple task to do it well.
Yes, the planning board, we also wrote in the recommendation to explore a grant-funded consultant to help with drafting the bylaw as well, because it is a technical exercise. The planning board should certainly be leading the effort, and the zoning board of appeals should also be involved, I believe, in setting the standards and criteria of the bylaw. But I think it is also worth exploring a grant-funded consultant to help with that.
It's always helpful.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I believe once the discussion begins, it's going to become a very political process because there's a lot of ramifications that are going to crawl out from under the rock. Once you start allowing ADUs, you got to decide then who's eligible to occupy an ADU in my backyard. And that gets into a lot of twangy political stuff. So I'm not saying it can't be done, but I think it's got to be done with a lot of care and a lot of thought, because it could lead to a lot of things blowing up in our face.
So Michael, I think what you're alluding to is like really defining the regulations to manage and oversee ADUs. It could be something as simple as adopting what the state currently has for ADUs and then work towards having a healthy list of regulations that can be managed by, you know, the appropriate board or body in town. But I agree, like, you're right. We want to have something, we definitely want to have this in place. And we definitely want to have something that supports the residents, because there are going to be residents that they'll want to do this, and it would be an opportunity. But then other residents may not, you know, want to see an ADU next to them, right? But if we have the right level of regulations that supports it, it can be a win for everybody.
So it seems like this would be either a midterm or a long-term pursuit.
Mhm.
Yeah, not going to be this coming town meeting, I don't think, especially if we're going
No.
to focus on 3A or other things.
I would agree on a midterm.
I agree on midterm as well. So let me just recap. So I think the lead would be the planning board. Support, I look at zoning board of appeals, I look at inspectional services, the building department. The select board, the board of selectmen as well. And there could be also, you know, an implementation committee or HPP, because we have the knowledge, having been, you know, discussing these and working with MAPC, you know, on the alternatives.
Yeah.
Okay.
And midterm on the time frame.
Yep.
So, all right, that's ADUs. So 3A, as everyone knows, we are going to be working on together, and MAPC will continue to provide technical assistance for that process. So I think this one's pretty clear cut that the lead would be this committee, as we are already charged with doing that, with support from MAPC. And you know, we will involve the planning board and zoning board of appeals, because they deal with zoning.
This is a big time planning board thing, and my understanding is we've got to be done with this in 15 months, right? Otherwise we're in penalty zone.
Yeah.
So that would mean optimally a fully drafted 3A zoning modification to go before town meeting in May.
Right, we're on track for that.
And we haven't done, we've done a lot of geography having to do with 40B, but very little with regard to 3A. Is it expected that this committee and the consultant will continue to consult with regard to identifying 3A proposed zones?
Yes, and the public input and analysis that we did on HPP sites corresponds to this. So we're not starting from square one. We have some areas that we know we want to explore further. And so when this plan's done, and it's time to shift focus to 3A, we'll review everything that we've learned and gathered from this process, and then zero in on those actual 3A areas that we would be studying and looking at for drafting the zoning.
Okay. So that's near term, HPP and planning board.
Yep. So that one's pretty clear cut. So I think we can move on. The next one is to consider using the publicly owned development opportunity sites are identified in the plan for affordable housing and townwide public park space. So yeah, what are we thinking? Like, who would what entity do you think would be best for leading that effort?
Alex, before we go there, could we just get a definition of what we're talking about? I apologize, everybody. I've been on this committee for just a couple weeks. So is it Greystone Road and Spring Road and Ward Road, all those?
It's the 10 sites from the report. All of the ones that are publicly owned, and I believe the ones that you mentioned are included.
So, but what about 5? Is that included below the Coast Guard?
Yes,
Yes.
but it just has its own recommendation because there's specific parts of that recommendation.
Because I believe that number 4 is kind of as you would characterize it, low hanging fruit, and it's something that we could get started on. Some of these development opportunities are pretty uncontroversial. It's like Greystone and the Spindrift, and there are others. But
Yeah.
Coast Guard site, we're talking about a different set of issues there. Since the town has already voted twice to sell them as private housing, and I know we talked about it last week and we voted on it, but that's a much bigger lift in terms of getting started on it.
So
Yeah.
Dana, it's Michelle. So one of the things that will happen, obviously coming out of this plan, right, is, the Board of Selectmen are going to have to look at this plan and look at these sites and provide direction back to the town administrator and obviously to us to say, we want to move forward with this site. And, things like design guidelines, putting together a scope of services and work that would require that particular site to move forward needs to go to town meeting for approval. So I wouldn't get so hang up around the 10 sites because there still has to be, someone has to make that decision, and it's not going to be us. But once that decision is made, then we can help, drive all the other elements to help, ensure public support for that particular site.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that, Michelle. There's going to be some effort to get the public support to come around to that Coast Guard housing, where some are going to be sold and some are not. So, which is contrary to 2 prior votes. So that's a little different.
No, it isn't.
It's different.
And
So-
all right, so somebody started to talk through, what was that, the comment?
We'll get to the Coast Guard recommendation in a moment. But for this one, in terms of the lead, we identified in the written recommendation to apply for technical assistance with either or both the Massachusetts Housing Partnership and Mass Housing. Both have specific long-standing programs for assisting communities with using publicly owned land and disposing sites for affordable housing. And I'll just note that it is also noted in the recommendation that this could include a mixture of market rate and affordable housing, which is usually required to make a project financially pencil. But anyway, I think the lead is probably I don't know the town entity, but I think you would want support from Massachusetts Housing Partnership or Mass Housing. We did note that MAPC offers technical assistance in this area too. That is also an option, but I'm not selling our services.
Is this where veterans housing lands as well? Number 4?
It could.
Okay.
Yeah, we have extensive language in the plan about local preference and looking for housing for veterans, prioritizing veterans in that process.
All right.
Say
Okay.
town, I would say town and perhaps housing authority as lead.
Well, it's the town-owned land study committee. What about their charter? We don't really
That's
talk
true.
about them much.
Yeah. Well, that's I'm considering that town also because that committee is appointed by the town administrator.
Okay, so then the lead would be the town housing authority with support from a grant funded consultant, but possibly MHP or Mass Housing. And then
Would HPP also be considered for support?
yeah, of course. I really feel like the implementation committee or this committee would be involved in all of this.
Okay.
Because you have the knowledge of guiding this planning process and good familiarity with all these recommendations. So time frame wise, this involves several different things. If you're going to dispose publicly on land, that requires a town meeting vote. You also have to prepare a request for proposals for development partners, review these proposals, decide on the ones that you like, set criteria for how the property would be developed, all of that. So I think it's probably more of long term in terms of actually realizing any sort of development, but that doesn't mean to say that like you couldn't get started. And to Dana's point about there are some sites that just seem pretty clear cut and you want to get started with them, that's fine. But I think the process is going to take a while, mid to long term, I would say. But what's your thoughts on that?
Alex, those are good points. I think number 4 lacks a little bit of focus, and bleeds over into the Coast Guard housing issues as well. So, I mean, if we can just provide some focus around number 4, we could get started. I think. I mean, some of these town-owned parcels are, underutilized, like Greystone Road. I mean, I think that could, get started pretty quickly. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that those decisions should be made by you and the entities that are implementing this. And, I would hesitate to say, get started on Greystone Road, when you haven't had the additional public process of, if this committee decides Greystone Road is one of the best opportunities that we could look at right now, then great. But I think then you would want to have some more public discourse about the site, build that support, because eventually you'd have to go to town meeting and do all of these other things. So those decisions, we want this plan to not be too prescriptive so that you still have the flexibility to make those decisions, and also circumstances change. So
Yeah, we can certainly start near term, but I think that's what we're talking about anyway. But in terms of actually getting to through the committees, through the selectmen, getting getting to RFPs and decisions, it seems like it's right, like in the more of the two midterm, medium term to long term of the plan, right? But
Hey,
I mean,
Tony.
start right away. Go ahead. Sorry.
Just a quick point on Greystone Road, and being not too prescriptive on the recommendation. One thing that Dana, I don't know if you've spoken with the rest of the housing authority yet or not, but there's multiple options with Greystone Road as to, whether it's going to be a development opportunity strictly between the town and the developer, or if the housing authority is going to take part in that, and potentially own that in the future as additional housing. So I think, that's still a question that has to be, discussed in the future. And I think it's important that we're leave it open, for that discussion. The thing I like, what I think is a great opportunity there is that it gives, the options that are available to us include, potential development, and then, shifting residents from housing authority property into that, and then, investing in existing housing authority property. And how that works out is, very complicated and, for a future conversation, but it's such a unique opportunity for us to consider. So I just want to make sure that, we're leaving that discussion, open and not being too prescriptive on what Greystone Road's going to look like, because that's something that we should definitely discuss with the housing authority in the future.
Just to, I'll quickly just respond to that, Tony. Last week we had a meeting, the housing authority. We talked about the development opportunities, and the housing authority. I didn't hear any objection to the Greystone Road, but there were questions about all the properties that the housing authority has. They're included as development opportunities. And the housing authority board of commissioners was like, we haven't really talked about it as a board of commissioners for the housing authority, and how that's all going to play out. So there was some concern that, we're not up to speed with what's going on here with these publicly owned sites.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want the housing authority to feel like they're behind the ball on it. I think it's, like I said, it's conversation that we definitely should have in the future with the housing authority. There's some, really great opportunities available to us that, we don't have to take advantage of them, but we should definitely discuss them. And I hope the housing authority is interested in having that discussion in the future. I just, my thing is that we should not be too prescriptive about how Greystone Road is going to work, because of, I don't want to limit us from having those discussions in the future.
Sure, but Greystone Road is unencumbered by the housing authority. Housing authority, they want to be involved, but it doesn't necessarily belong to the housing authority.
Right. It could in the future. Even if it didn't, we could still be creative in, timing it in a way that, we'd have to talk about how that impacts, revenue to the town. But, to be in a position to give the housing authority, who's limited in funding from the state, an opportunity to potentially relocate residents who invest in the housing authority property, whether they want to grow or not, is something that I think it would be something that we have to talk about. We should definitely discuss that in the future, and no pressure on the housing authority, but we should definitely have that conversation.
Yeah, this is just the start of that conversation. It just says that, this is a potential thing that the housing authority should consider, but, this is just the beginning of that. Anything that happens is obviously up to the housing authority, and those conversations, just need to take place. But we're just identifying the potential there and really just getting the conversation started.
Yes, and my comment was just that to leave the door open for those conversations. I don't want to be too prescriptive about how Greystone work is gonna play itself out at this point.
Well, the plan is just a plan. It can't be prescriptive. It doesn't have the power to be prescriptive.
Okay.
Okay, so just we are over 8 o'clock. So in the interest of time, we have
Alex, we
two.
can keep going. If the members of the committee can stay, so we can get through this, then let's get through this for the next 30 minutes.
Number 5 is the Coast Guard recommendation. Who do we think would be the lead and the support for that?
Well, certainly the Board of Selectmen, because
Board of Selectmen.
the decision to move forward on the 2021 town meeting vote is in the hands of the Board of Selectmen. So certainly the Board of Selectmen, but I'm not saying we're the only voice in this matter.
But that would make sense to be the lead. So who would be in a supporting role?
This committee.
Yep.
Yeah.
So probably this committee, probably the housing authority, if we're looking to set aside some of the land, right?
But the housing authority
the
doesn't
plan-
own that land, right?
Right, it would have.
Currently not, yes.
It would, again, similar to what we talked about with Greystone Road, some arrangement to be made. Likely the planning board, because they've already been, the lots have already been subdivided. And so depending on whatever future plan it is, whether, continue to keep the subdivision and build out affordable housing, or join those remaining lots into one parcel and do, apartments or something, for example.
Yeah, so the planning board would have to be involved. I do just want to clarify that, if this recommendation is implemented and a portion of the site is used for affordable housing, that does need to be voted on at town meeting. Also, the affordable housing could be privately developed, privately owned, doesn't have to be the housing authority, though I do think it is good to have the housing authority involved in the conversations in case the authority was interested in expanding its properties. But again, that's just the start of the conversation.
So Mark, does that earlier Coast Guard study committee, is that still active?
Tony, yeah, I'm not sure if it's active. I'm not sure if it is. Tony, you on?
This committee that, you mean it's a subcommittee of the Board of Selectmen.
No, he's asking if the Coast Guard Housing Committee can be reconstituted to help
Well,
support.
I was
If we
asking
were-
if it was still constituted and still staffed and still active, or if it's basically run out of steam.
It's not active, but it was
Okay.
reauthorized by town meeting.
In May.
Members, it hasn't met since the 2021 town meeting. So it's not active, but it is authorized.
So I would include them either as part of the lead or support.
And that's the title of that was the Coast Guard Housing Committee, something like that?
No, it's Coast Guard Housing Design and Development Advisory Committee, CGDD. A. C. Yeah. CGDDAC. That was what it was.
Okay, and what would the time frame you think be for this?
My opinion is short term. Now, we're not constrained by, when I say short term, we're not constrained by the annual town meeting. I mean, it could be a special town meeting, but it could be either one of those two. But certainly, we're in the process now of implementing the
Clean up.
the town meeting vote. And we're going to start next week or 2 weeks from now, leveling the properties and cleaning the properties, and we're going to be making decisions pretty soon. So I would say short term.
Okay. That makes sense. So I think we're solid on that one in terms of entities and time frame. Okay, so then the last one is really, I think, very clear cut. Basically everything that you would need for that is written in the plan. The description of these programs, how they help, how they benefit folks who are wanting to age in place, remain in their homes, or younger folks who want to buy their first homes. We incorporated some committee input and added additional resources to this section. So it's just really about getting it on the town website. So who would lead that effort?
Was it, is it, so a couple of things here. On this one, you keep saying the town website, but what about in-person sessions, like especially on first-time home buyer ownership?
Yeah.
Communities do offer, or communities have, I've seen, offer something like, how do you buy a house? Like, how do you get financing? And they partner with, other either nonprofit groups or state agencies. So I don't want to just say it's just all website, because some people may find going out on the internet challenging as well. And I don't mean for maybe not so much the first time home buyer, but programs for like aging in place and stuff, where you click on a link and then you see 5 pages of content. So I just want to be careful. Like sometimes the in-person discussions are more valuable than just putting it on a web page.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and that is part of the recommendation. So thanks for reminding me of that. There is also the one of the next steps of partnering with an organization, hosting a workshop or an event or office hours at town hall.
Okay. But town hall could, be the lead and facilitate all of that. I almost think council on the aging
Yeah,
would take some of this as well, or maybe like part lead, part support.
yeah, I definitely. Are there any organizations that would be more suited for the other demographic of younger folks who grew up in Nahant, looking to buy their first home? Maybe the school.
Yeah, school committee.
I mean, we could ask the school committee and see if they would like to help participate. Oh, the other thing is the Veterans Association. I think they would probably want to help support too with aging in place.
And then I think the housing authority too could help get the
Yep.
word out to affordable housing residents. Okay, and so then this would be probably a short-term thing, right?
Nothing
would
long term here.
I
All
think
short term.
I think the using publicly owned sites for affordable housing is more of a start in the near term, but it's going to take a while. That would be more of a long-term one, I would think. Yeah, just to recap, that the affordable housing trust we just said would be short-term, ADUs would be midterm, 3A short-term, obviously, because we're working on that next. Publicly owned sites for affordable housing would begin in the near term, but would, I think, be more of a long-term thing to actually completely implement that.
Well, I mean, it's often said that when everything's a priority, you have no priorities. So
Yeah.
maybe we need to sharpen the pencil, think a little bit about this, and focus on what is really short term.
Well, let me ask you a question. There's town meeting, right? You need town meeting for the Affordable Housing Trust. you need it for changing zoning for ADUs, you need it for 3A, you need it for publicly owned sites. All of these require town meeting. Which one would you put on town meeting first?
Number
Not
three.
Not number
3A.
two, yeah, 3A,
Number
not,
three.
not, number two can mature a little bit.
Yeah.
Why don't we put ADUs as a, like, yeah, okay, so 3A is the first town meeting thing. So then I think the Affordable Housing Trust maybe needs to be midterm and ADUs needs to be long-term, because I think then you would go for the trust to town meeting and then ADUs to the town, following town meeting.
Well, we want to get the Affordable Housing Trust established as soon as possible, so we can begin to accumulate funds to do some of this stuff. There's no reason to wait any longer than the next town meeting in May.
I agree,
Yeah.
Mike.
Yeah, I could see 3A and the trust being on the same town meeting, although I think that this discussing that as a strategy requires more conversation, but.
You know, the Coast Guard housing, you know, whether we're ready this town meeting, I think we'll be ready within the next sort of year and a half, whether it's this year or a special town meeting, but I can certainly see that happening sooner rather than later.
You guys have a time frame for when the cleanup is going to be done and the lots are ready to be put on the market, Mark?
Yeah, well, Tony can talk to that, but pretty soon.
And
So-
the selectmen already have all the authority they need to sell enough lots to retire the note, correct?
Correct.
So that doesn't,
Did
I
you,
mean, town meetings required to change the status or the ownership or the conditions that would apply to any lots that don't get sold to retire the note, correct?
Right, Mike. That's correct.
Yeah, and it would require a town meeting vote in any case, like even if there hadn't been a previous town meeting vote. It involves disposal of publicly owned land, so it would need town meeting vote.
No,
Either
but
way.
the disposal to retire the note has already been authorized. So that's totally in the selectmen's power now.
Yes, but it's got those conditions about subdividing the lots and gross floor
That's-
area and,
That's been done.
yeah. Yeah, that's, so that would need to be changed at town meeting if you're gonna use a portion of the site for affordable housing.
So Alex, it seems like 5 is a 5A and a 5B. 5A is what the town's authorized and voted for and borrowed money for, which is the demolition and conditioning of those sites for sale. And then the part B, 5B, would be reconfiguring the affordable housing component of it, and that's what requires the vote.
Yeah, I
So-
think that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I agree with that, Dana.
So I mean, so Mark, would you agree that 5A is already underway, right? We're gonna start
Yes.
knocking houses down, and so just that can be the time frame is very short term or yesterday. And 5B is something that's more medium term.
Um,
I don't know.
It could be short term, medium term. Yes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. All right, well, just summarize timeframes. It sounds like we want to move on that affordable housing trust, so that'd be short term. ADUs, we think is going to be more of a process. So we're thinking midterm. 3A is obviously short term as we're doing that next. I think publicly owned sites, like, you could get started with that process, as soon as you would like to, but it's going to take time. So I recommend having that as more of a long-term thing. Coast Guard, what's already happening is happening. The second component of it be midterm, and then promoting state programs would be short term.
Righto.
Okay.
Make it so, Alex.
I will
So-
use my magic wand.
So let me make sure I understand that this is gonna be another appendix, or a table for, in the end of the strategies.
Yeah, so this will just come right
We've-
after the strategies. Just
Okay.
just this table filled in. It'll be very basic, very simple.
Okay, we've confirmed all of the updates, but let me just ask this question of the committee. Are there any updates that we need to talk about or we haven't addressed? Given, I sent out the feedback form, I've added a few others, I know we covered those.
I
Is
have
there
some
anything from the
some,
committee that we need to cover?
I've got some quick suggested clarifications to the text that we can do it offline after we finish the meeting, or everybody can stay on and listen to them. They're pretty quick.
Okay,
So on page, I'm sorry, do you want me to go ahead or
no,
wait?
before we go ahead, before that, Mike, I wanted to see if there's anything else that Alex and John wanted to cover.
That's all we wanted to cover.
Okay,
Well, no, actually, we just wanted to talk about the next steps for finalizing the plan.
that too, I wanted to
Yeah.
get into that next, so, all right. So Michael, before we get into your edits, let's
Sure.
just talk next steps.
Sure.
So basically, we'll add that chart, address the other things we discussed tonight, like making it very clear that we're talking about the rectory and not the church. We'll make sure that the language for that is discussed appropriately, so that we're not misrepresenting any kind of conversations our archdiocese has had. We will be looking more closely at the country club site, following your lead, Michelle, on specific parts of the site to clarify rather than the entire site. We're going to remove those new sites based on the vote that you took. And we're going to add the chart with the implementation guidelines that we just discussed.
Okay.
Right.
So
Yeah.
based on that, when would you have the revised copy back to the committee?
So in addition to that, we need to finalize the document by adding table of contents, finalizing page number references, and our communications team is going to do a review of the whole report to make sure there are no grammatical errors or copy edits that may have been missed. So based on that, I would say probably a week from today, and then we would be able to send that report to the planning board and the Nahant Board of Selectmen. Each board has to vote to adopt the plan. We are going to have a meeting of both boards, a joint board meeting, which is best practice and typical for housing planning process, so that if the boards would like to suggest revisions or ask for any changes, everyone's in the same room and that can be done together. But essentially the way that this will work is MAPC will give a presentation about the planning process. The boards will have had the report several weeks in advance to read and review. We'll present on the planning process and the recommendations and take questions. Then we'll ask the boards to take a vote on whether to adopt the plan. The boards can vote to adopt the plan as is, or if they would like a change, they can vote to adopt the plan with conditions. So for instance, it could be we vote to adopt the plan with the condition that, I don't know, this site is removed or something like that. And then we take those meeting minutes. We will need a letter from Tony, and we take the plan and those meeting minutes and we submit that to the state, and they will review the plan against their criteria. We've done the plan in such a way where no one should really be concerned about meeting state criteria, but then they review it. And once it's approved, then you'll have a certified housing production plan. And then if you make any progress on affordable housing or the GLAM requirements, then you're in good shape for safe harbor. So there's a public comment period of this is a public hearing, and that's where we really strongly encourage the committee members to chime in, talk about the work that we've done over this last year, the public engagement that we've done, and just talk about the benefits of the plan, so that you can support the plan's adoption.
That public meeting is the one that's got the asterisks on the current screen, right? Or something different?
Yes, that's it. And I think we were looking at November 8th. Is that still the target date, Michelle and Tony and Mark?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand this. So within a week, sometime after the 12th, we'll have that copy that we will be sending to both the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board. Patrick, keep me honest here. Are we having a Planning Board meeting on the 17th?
I'd have to take a look at this schedule. But we usually have one on the second or third Tuesday of the month. So
Okay, because by the time, yeah, so my only question is, if the Planning Board wants to meet and talk as a board about it before going to the Board of Selectmen, they're gonna have to have either delay this meeting on the 17th to the 24th to give them some time, or ultimately could do it the 31st. So we're gonna have to write to Rob and see what he wants to do.
Yeah, I don't think that should be a problem.
Okay,
The 31st is trick or
so
treating.
that's just for the Planning Board. So
No trick or
they
treating.
meet as a
Yeah,
board.
we can do it any other time there's availability. So
Okay.
it's also not a problem, but
All
might
right.
be a problem.
So then
All
if
right.
that joint board meeting's on November 8th, the boards would have about a month to review the plan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that sounds good. I'm comfortable with that approach. I opened it up to the committee to see if they had any other questions or comments. So coming out of this, just looking at the next few weeks, when does MAPC want to begin talking 3A?
Yeah, I think we need to think about that a little bit. I think the intention was to wait until the plan is adopted.
Okay. Yep.
But we do have some analysis underway. So there may be some things that we can share with you to just help get you thinking about the decision that we'll want to make at the start of that process, which is to decide the locations that we think are going to make sense for 3A.
Okay.
But I think it's probably best to hold off on focused committee meetings for 3A until the plan is adopted.
Okay, I'm just looking at the calendar, being cognizant. We are at year end. So after we have the meeting on the 8th, we come up to, obviously the Thanksgiving holiday. So realistically, we may not be meeting as a committee until December.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I
Okay.
mean, typically,
Right.
you run into those holidays, and the best time to meet is the beginning of December and then mid-January.
All right, I just want to be sensitive of people's times and commitments, because obviously people are going to start making their travel arrangements and, prepare for year end. So, okay, that
Yeah.
works. All right, I'm going to pivot over to Michael, because Michael wanted to cover some more updates, and then
Right.
go ahead, Michael, why don't you start?
Sorry. Yeah, just to clarify the current screen, this last item with the asterisk on it, that is the point at which you would expect a vote of both the Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen to adopt our report. Or
Yeah,
reject it.
so
Okay.
we'll make the
And-
presentation, get the questions, then they'll open it up for public comment, and that's when you would say, we really think you should adopt the plan, and then they'll close public
Okay.
comment and vote.
So they may adopt it, they may deny it and ask for something to happen, but we can come back to that. Once they act favorably on it, you guys submit it to somebody in the state, is that right? And then how long is it typical that the state takes to act on a submission like that?
My experience, it takes them about a month, maybe less time than that.
Okay, so we could potentially have an approved and adopted and approved plan by the end of this year.
That is a strong possibility. But
Good.
that's why, it's really important for the committee to advocate for the adoption of the plan and discuss the benefits of it. This is a plan that will meet housing need in Nahant. And also, as you know, it gives you a lot more control over what happens by giving you the ability to reach safe harbor.
Right, good. Okay, so I've got some suggestions for clarification on the draft plan. Start out with page 5. You've got the key housing terms, and you've adopted an acronym or an initialism, NOAH, for naturally occurring affordable housing. I think that's a great initialism. And I would suggest that right below it, where you've got deed restricted affordable housing, you adopt another one and just call it DRAH. So you can use that handy term, because I believe that is coextensive with subsidized housing inventory. And I think it is very helpful to the reader to minimize the number of concepts that they have to deal with. So am I correct that deed restricted affordable housing is coextensive with subsidized housing inventory?
Well, yes. I mean, it gets a little bit wonky because you can have market rate housing on your subsidized housing inventory if it was built through 40B and it's a rental. Again, that's like very wonky. We have it listed as AH. Does that work, or do you think there's some benefit to doing DR?
Well, I think because really to get away from ever having to say capital I or capital A or lowercase a, I think that makes the mind of the public, just the eyes of the public, just blur. So I'm suggesting a 4-letter initialism to correspond with NOAH, so that people can begin to keep them straight and make more sense of it. Then on the next area, the area median income. It's not a big deal, but I think it's worth correcting. 80% of $140,200 is not $111,850. It's close, but it's not exact. So I think it would be worth correcting that to the actual calculated number, or explaining what's going on, why these calculations are not correct.
But that's a figure provided, not calculated by us, but provided directly by HUD. And it may not be exactly that way because it's adjusted for family size, and it's different depending on whether you're a single person household, 4-person household, or whatever.
So the 80% really doesn't matter. We should look at the numbers given and forget about 80%.
Yeah, well, I mean, 80% is the general threshold. It's how like a lot of the data is organized. So when we say the percent of households in Nahant that are eligible for affordable housing, it is looking at how many are at 80% or below. It's just 80% is adjusted for the size of the household.
So using the numbers, Mike, the problem with saying the actual dollar amount for the household income is, number one, like Alex said, there's a lot of nuance with it. Number two, the numbers change every year. So sticking to a percentage and saying that whatever it is that HUD comes up with in their calculations, that's the nationwide standard. That's also the standard that is adopted for housing authorities, for the lottery, for housing in Massachusetts, things like that. So that's why we have it in there the way it is.
Okay, then I suggest you qualify the 80% to say approximately 80% or something like 80%, so people don't quarrel with your figures, because these
Sure.
What you've told me is a lot of stuff, but I'm not able to follow it. And I do have a little bit of skill in this area. On page 6.
How about this, Mike? Would you be okay with us putting these come from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and you can go to this link to see what the updated figures look like?
You mean a hyperlink?
I mean, I don't know if it would be necessarily clickable, but yeah, like a web URL that says this is where these numbers come from, and this is where you can see what they would look like for right now.
I think that would be helpful. Okay,
Okay.
great. On the following page, page 6, footnote 1, you start off by saying a community may claim safe harbor and thereby deny a developer a comprehensive permit by 3 mechanisms, blah, 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 glam. And it's ending at the word glam. And then you start, however, meeting any one of these 3 criteria does not mean a community has met local needs for affordable housing. Now, I understand that affordable housing in general is a broader term than conformity with 40B, but I think putting those 2 sentences in that kind of juxtaposition suggests that there is some other mechanism at work that's not explained. So if I'm understanding it correctly, there's a generalized desire for a community to attain local need, to satisfy local need for affordable housing, but there are no legal consequences associated with not doing so. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
I mean, the point is like, even if Nahant got up to 10% on the SHI, right, which would be a lot of units, that still wouldn't be enough units for the amount of households that are eligible in Nahant. I think it's 645 households, which is 40% of households in Nahant
Of
are
course.
eligible for affordable housing. So the point that's being made is that, even if you meet this legal requirement, you still have more work to do to meet the actual need for affordable housing.
Well, that's
Yeah.
true, but that's a statewide issue, and it's far, far bigger than Nahant. And Nahant is not in our lifetimes, gonna be able to satisfy that need. So I just would suggest you break that up and phrase it in such a way that it doesn't suggest that there's a 40B associated consequence with not meeting the local need for affordable housing. And actually,
Yeah.
you capitalize it there as affordable housing. I think if we do meet those 3 one of those 3 requirements, we do meet the local need for capital A affordable housing. Correct?
Yeah, we can clarify that there's not a 40B consequence, but I just think the point still holds that you have 645 households in Nahant that need affordable housing.
Fair enough, and I think that's discussed somewhere else. It might be worth reiterating that this is a generalized, if you will, a moral duty as opposed to a legal duty.
Sure.
And then I also think it makes sense. I don't remember where it's cited, but there's a reference to Nahant's median income at 94,000, something like that. And I would suggest it be clarified that number, as accurate as it is as a demographic statistic, doesn't have any bearing on the calculation of conformity with our 40B requirements, which is driven more by the other numbers we talked about, the 78,000, 111,000, and so forth, 112. Okay. Yeah. Now that is basically to make this more digestible by the public, so that their eyes do not glaze over with all of these, if you will, foreign concepts. Thank you.
Yeah.
Michael,
thank
was
you.
that the only updates that you had?
The only ones that I've got ready and
Okay.
teed up and with enough time to deal with now.
All right. I'm gonna pass it over to Dana.
Thanks, Michelle. So we're doing kind of random quick hitter edits. Is that right? No.
Yeah, let's use the time while we have it to get as many clarifications back to them, and then certainly we'll see the copy, that. So I guess let me ask this question before you start, Dana. Are we going to have an opportunity to see another copy and do another read, or this is going to be it and we're going to vote on it as amended with all these changes?
In the interest of getting this draft plan to the boards with a lot of time for them to review it, I do not think the committee should, review the plan again. We've been through several rounds, and the material within the plan are things that we've reviewed together throughout the 1-year process.
Okay. I have 3 things to cover. 3 things. Is that all right?
Yeah, go ahead, Dana.
First on page 10, where the housing production plan, housing opportunity sites, acre is used. I think they meant to say mile.
We'll take a look at that.
Yeah, it just looks like some kind of typo. The second thing I wanted to cover is, in terms of the interested parties for this report, FinCom should probably start looking at this housing production plan and to analyze what the budgetary impacts are going to be from these various proposals. Like, for example, the Coast Guard housing, if it's not going to be paying property taxes on the whole property out there, what does that mean? This is just an example now. It's just, what does that mean to the town's finances? And so how does that get
So-
included in this? Like,
So should we put FinCom as a support for the Coast Guard recommendation as well as probably the Affordable Housing Trust recommendation so that they can be involved and give their input on those recommendations?
that's what I was thinking, Alex. So
Yeah,
those two,
I think that's
probably,
great.
maybe others too.
But Dana, you realize right now the Coast Guard housing isn't paying any taxes. The only income we were getting was rental income.
Yeah, I realize that, but
Okay.
there are going to be impacts to the budget of the town, depending upon what decision is made. So I don't know if FinCom's in a position to start thinking about this now, but it's not too early.
I think they should be involved in discussions around implementation for those recommendations, so we can put them in there as support.
Yeah, and then finally, on page 100, there's mention of a right to return for people that were displaced or moved out of the Coast Guard housing. So I would offer maybe we should discuss. I don't know if this is the time. It's kind of late, but those rights to return, may they be subject to paying back all the rent that was not paid for people that stayed there, that are still there, rent free, including any costs of the town, such as utilities, water, sewer, etc.
I appreciate the thought around it. I just don't think that that's something that we should be detailing in the plan. I mean, this is like a good example of something that needs to be discussed by the entities implementing that recommendation.
Sure, but the right to return is brought up, and it's not
The right
defined.
to
But the only recommendation, Dana, it's not a requirement. And whatever gets detailed out on what happens at that location would be subject to being a requirement and likely a vote of town meeting. So if we were to do a development, just for example, the Board of Selectmen says, yeah, we're gonna pay off the loan, there'll be a little bit like leftover cash, maybe we'll take a few of the house lots, do something. They don't have to use the right to return. If they do, and they want to put some caveat and say for these tenants, whoever they are, it's subject to paying, making restitution, then, they can include it. But again, it would still likely require something of town meeting.
Okay, so I'm hearing it doesn't really belong in this plan. Is that
No, I think, I'm not discounting it. I think it's great. I just think like that's too much to Alex's point. It's like a level of detail that we probably will have to finesse later when there is actually a development plan for that location.
Okay, I hear you, Michelle, but I just wanted to bring it up as a general
No,
thought.
it's a good recommendation. It's a good comment.
Mark, what do you think about that idea of right to return subject to paying back rent?
Well, we're on top of this. Town council's working on it, so I do think those discussions outside of this plan.
So generally favorable?
Yes.
All right, thank you. That's all I had.
Okay. So then Is there anybody else that has any comments or other feedback they want to include? So I obviously want to give, committee
Sorry.
members who are, oh no, go ahead, Len.
Sorry, I'm sorry to be jumping in. Where do the design guidelines recommendations that, thinking about next steps, where are those going to appear properly in this report?
So design guidelines for 3A. Because design guidelines would be something that you would create as a part of zoning regulations. So
That would be under 3A for sure, but I'm talking about housing production, affordable housing.
like in an HPP site.
Yep.
So that's something that you would clarify in the criteria that you would set in an RFP. So that's how that's incorporated.
But can we somehow memorialize that recommendation in this report? Can we
Yeah, I
say,
think we
yeah.
can add some language around setting design guidelines as a part of RFP criteria.
Exactly. That's all I'm thinking. Thank you,
Sure.
Alex.
Yeah, we can do that.
Good point, Lynn. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Len. All right, so 2 members of our committee aren't here tonight. And I still, they may be coming back with feedback as well. So, we're going to move forward with the plan. I had put in the agenda a vote to accept the housing plan as amended with subsequent changes from the committee and send to the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board for review. We know that you're going to be updating it and sending out a copy for us to read, and then simultaneously sending it to the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board. Is the committee comfortable voting on this motion?
I am.
I'm
I am.
all I'm all
All right,
for it.
So let me restate the motion. So the motion is to vote to accept the draft of the housing plan as amended with subsequent changes from the committee and send to the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board for review and adoption. Is there a second on the motion?
I second it.
Lynn seconds it. Any further discussion? Okay, if not, then we'll go to a roll call vote. Mark,
Yes.
Michael,
Aye.
Patty,
Yes.
Dana,
No.
Patrick,
Yes.
Lynn,
Yes.
the chair is yes, and the motion passes. Fantastic. All right, just a couple more items left on the agenda. So we don't have any other new business unless there's any committee members that have new business that they wanted to discuss. Okay. The other item I added here was regarding old business. We've talked about this before in very earlier start of the meeting. It's just around the use of email and the open meeting law. And it's just really just a reminder that to please adhere to the open meeting law. If you are going to respond, it's probably easier to respond back to the chair, and I can certainly facilitate the updates or communications back out to the entire committee. We have the Google Docs, and I've asked the committee members to please use it in terms of listing any updates or changes in the form, so we can collect those and you all have access to it, so you can all review it. But I've also emailed it out with the updates and changes to everybody, so hopefully that's helped folks. But if you do see something, as we get the next copy that comes out and we have to make some grammatical change or something, let's facilitate the same way that we've done before. I'll put a revised form out there, and please be mindful when emailing the entire committee, because we want to keep those opinions in the committee meeting when we're meeting. So most important. All right. Anything else? Any other final comments before we adjourn? All right. If not, then I'm asking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Patrick has moved it. Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Patty seconds it, so we're gonna go to a roll call vote. Michael,
Aye.
Lynn,